In the 1970s, our blue-collar grandfathers knew how to make Christmas dinner count. Their work at the table didn't just feed people. It created meals so real they turned cheap meat into something worth remembering. Dinners that have been lost to time.
And for a hot meal, without that warmed-over taste, how about hot lamb sandwiches, made with last night's main dish and piping hot, rich lamb gravy?
These 30 forgotten blue-collar Christmas dinners from the 1970s might sound too plain today, but they carried working families through long shifts, small paychecks, and beyond. Let's rediscover forgotten blue-collar Christmas dinners from the 1970s that have disappeared. Walk into Grandpa Joe's Detroit kitchen on December 25, 1975, and watch him making Salisbury steak. He'd mix ground beef with breadcrumbs, an egg, diced onion, salt, and pepper, then shape the mixture into oval patties. The patties fried in a cast-iron skillet until browned on both sides. He'd remove them, pour a can of brown gravy into the same skillet, add the patties back, cover, and simmer until cooked through. The gravy cost 35 cents and made cheap ground beef taste like steak. The dinner cost $2 and fed 6 people. The Salisbury steaks tasted savory and meaty, with the canned gravy rich and salty. Salisbury steak disappeared by 1983 when people decided it was TV dinner food and refused to make it at home. The tradition died when frozen Swanson dinners became synonymous with Salisbury steak, and nobody remembered it was once a real dinner working families made from scratch. Stand beside Grandpa Bill's Ohio kitchen on December 24, 1974, and watch him frying pork chops. He'd dredge thin-cut pork chops in seasoned flour, then fry them in hot lard until golden and crispy. After removing the chops, he'd make milk gravy by whisking flour into the hot grease, then slowly adding milk until it thickened. The chops went back into the gravy to stay warm. The dinner cost $1.50 and fed 6 people. The pork chops were crispy outside and juicy inside, and the milk gravy was thick, peppery, and savory. Fried pork chops with milk gravy disappeared by 1984 when people stopped cooking with lard and started thinking fried food was unhealthy. The tradition died when baked pork chops replaced fried, and milk gravy was forgotten entirely. Walk into Grandma Betty's Michigan kitchen on December 25, 1976, and watch her making meatloaf for Christmas dinner. She'd mix ground beef with breadcrumbs, an egg, diced onion, ketchup, Worcestershire sauce, salt, and pepper. The mixture went into a loaf pan, and she'd spread a thick layer of ketchup mixed with brown sugar over the top. It baked for an hour until the ketchup glaze caramelized. The dinner cost $1.50 and fed 8 people. The meatloaf tasted savory and slightly sweet, with the ketchup glaze sticky and tangy. Meatloaf didn't disappear entirely, but serving it for Christmas dinner did. Stand in Grandpa Earl's Kentucky kitchen on December 24, 1973, and watch him frying chicken in a cast-iron skillet. He'd cut a whole chicken into pieces, soak them in buttermilk, dredge them in seasoned flour, and fry them in hot Crisco until golden and crispy. The kitchen filled with steam and the smell of fried chicken. The dinner cost $2 and fed 6 people. The chicken was crispy outside, juicy inside, with seasoned flour clinging to every piece. Fried chicken didn't disappear, but the tradition of making it at home for Christmas dinner did. He'd fry thick slices of bacon until crispy, remove them, then fry sliced onions in the bacon grease until caramelized. He'd dredge slices of beef liver in flour and fry them quickly in the same skillet, no more than 2 minutes per side or they'd turn grainy. The liver, onions, and crumbled bacon went on plates together. The dinner cost $1 and fed 6 people. The liver tasted rich and iron-heavy, the onions sweet, the bacon smoky. 45 more to go. Notice something? Every single one used cheap cuts of meat stretched with breadcrumbs, flour, or gravy. Your blue-collar grandfather fed families on $2. You spend $15 on a single meal. That's not progress. That's forgetting how to survive. Keep going. Stand beside Grandpa Joe's Detroit kitchen on December 24, 1977, and watch him making pork and beans with hot dogs. He'd slice hot dogs into coins, fry them in a skillet until browned, then dump 2 large cans of pork and beans into the skillet with the hot dogs. He'd add ketchup, brown sugar, mustard, and a little vinegar, then simmer everything until thick. The dinner cost 75 cents and fed 6 people. It tasted sweet, tangy, and smoky, with the hot dogs adding meatiness. Pork and beans with hot dogs disappeared by 1984 when people decided it was kid food and refused to serve it at adult dinners. The tradition died when working-class foods became shameful instead of practical. Grandpa Joe stopped making it in 1982 when his family said they wanted real dinner on Christmas. Walk into Grandma Ruth's Vermont kitchen on December 25, 1974, and watch her making sloppy joes for Christmas dinner. She'd brown ground beef with diced onions, drain the grease, then add ketchup, brown sugar, vinegar, Worcestershire sauce, and mustard. The mixture simmered until thick and saucy. She'd serve it on toasted hamburger buns. The dinner cost $1.25 and fed 8 people. It tasted sweet, tangy, and slightly spicy, messy, and satisfying. Sloppy Joes disappeared as a Christmas dinner by 1983, when people decided sandwiches weren't special enough for holidays. The tradition died when working-class families started trying to serve fancy meals on Christmas and abandoned the foods that had fed them for generations. Grandma Ruth stopped making them in 1980 when her family complained they wanted real Christmas dinner. Stand in Grandpa Bill's Ohio kitchen on December 24, 1972, and watch him making chipped beef on toast. He'd tear dried beef into strips, rinse it to remove some of the salt, then make a white sauce by melting butter, whisking in flour, and slowly adding milk. The beef went into the sauce, and the whole thing got ladled over toasted white bread. The dinner cost 50 cents and fed 6 people. It tasted salty and creamy, with the beef chewy and concentrated. Chipped beef on toast disappeared by 1982 when dried beef stopped being sold in jars, and younger generations started calling it gross military food. The tradition died with World War II veterans who brought it home from the Army and served it to their families. Grandpa Bill stopped making it in 1978 when he couldn't find dried beef anymore. Walk into Grandpa Earl's Kentucky kitchen on December 25, 1976, and watch him making hamburger steaks. He'd shape ground beef into thick patties, season them with salt and pepper, and fry them in a skillet until browned. He'd remove the patties, fry sliced onions in the grease, then make gravy by adding flour and beef broth. The patties went back into the gravy to simmer. The dinner cost $1.50 and fed 6 people. The hamburger steaks tasted like real steak, savory, meaty, with the onion gravy rich and thick. Hamburger steaks disappeared by 1984 when people decided ground beef patties weren't fancy enough for Christmas. The tradition died when working-class families started serving turkey and ham instead of the foods they could actually afford. Grandpa Earl stopped making them in 1981 when his family said they were embarrassed. Stand beside Grandma Pearl's Hawaii kitchen on December 24, 1975, and watch her frying Spam for Christmas dinner. She'd slice a can of Spam thick and fry it until the edges were crispy and caramelized. She'd fry eggs in the same skillet, letting them soak up the Spam grease. Fried Spam and eggs with white rice was dinner. The dinner cost 75 cents and fed 4 people. The Spam was salty, fatty, and slightly sweet, the eggs rich and runny. Fried Spam for dinner didn't disappear in Hawaii. Hawaiians still love Spam, but mainland America stopped serving it by 1983 when Spam became a punchline and people were ashamed to eat it. The tradition died when processed meat became a joke instead of survival food. Grandma Pearl never stopped making it. 10 dinners gone, 40 left. Every single one used ground beef, hot dogs, Spam, or organ meats. Your grandfather wasn't eating fancy. He was eating what he could afford after paying rent. You judge his food while ordering Uber Eats. That's the difference. Keep going. Walk into Grandpa Joe's Detroit kitchen on December 25, 1978, and watch him opening a can of Hormel corned beef hash. He'd dump the hash into a hot cast-iron skillet and fry it until the bottom turned crispy and brown. He'd flip it like a pancake, fry the other side, then cut it into wedges. Fried eggs on top were optional but recommended. The dinner cost 60 cents and fed 4 people. The hash tasted salty, beefy, and crispy with chunks of potato throughout. Canned corned beef hash disappeared as a Christmas dinner by 1983 when people decided serving food from a can was low class. The tradition died when working-class families started trying to hide where their food came from. Grandpa Joe stopped making it in 1980 when his family said they were embarrassed to tell people they ate hash for Christmas. Stand in Grandpa Frank's Indiana kitchen on December 24, 1973, and watch him making breaded pork tenderloin sandwiches. He'd pound pork tenderloin slices, paper thin with a meat mallet, dredge them in flour, dip them in beaten egg, coat them in breadcrumbs, and fry them in hot oil until golden. The pork was so thin and so wide it hung over the edges of the hamburger bun. The dinner cost $2 and fed 6 people. The pork was crispy outside, tender inside, with the breading crunchy and seasoned. Breaded pork tenderloin sandwiches didn't disappear entirely. Indiana still makes them, but serving them for Christmas dinner did. By 1984, people decided sandwiches weren't special enough for holidays. The tradition died when working-class foods became shameful. Walk into Grandpa Earl's Texas kitchen on December 25, 1975, and watch him making chicken fried steak. He'd pound cube steak thin with a meat mallet, dredge it in seasoned flour, dip it in beaten egg, dredge it in flour again, then fry it in hot oil until golden and crispy. After removing the steaks, he'd make cream gravy by whisking flour into the hot oil, then slowly adding milk. The dinner cost $2 and fed 6 people. The steak was crispy outside, tender inside, and the cream gravy was thick, peppery, and rich. Chicken fried steak didn't disappear entirely, but serving it for Christmas dinner did. Stand beside Grandpa Bill's Ohio kitchen on December 24, 1976, and watch him making pork chops and rice. He'd spread uncooked white rice in the bottom of a casserole dish, pour cream of mushroom soup mixed with water over the rice, then lay raw pork chops on top. He'd season the chops with salt, pepper, and garlic powder, cover the dish tightly with foil, and bake for an hour and a half. The pork chops cooked. The rice absorbed the soup and pork drippings. The dinner cost $2 and fed 6 people. The pork chops were tender, and the rice was creamy and flavorful. Walk into Grandma Betty's Michigan kitchen on December 25, 1977, and watch her making beef and noodles. She'd cube a cheap cut of beef, usually chuck roast, and simmer it in beef broth for 3 hours until it fell apart. She'd add wide egg noodles to the broth, cook until tender, then season everything with salt, pepper, and onion powder. The dinner cost $2.50 and fed 8 people. The beef was tender and the noodles were thick and soft, soaking up all the broth. Beef and noodles didn't disappear entirely. Midwesterners still make it, but serving it for Christmas dinner did. By 1984, people decided it was too plain for holidays. The tradition died when working-class families started trying to make special meals. 35 left. These weren't gourmet. These were survival dinners made by people who worked 50-hour weeks for minimum wage. Your grandfather ate chicken fried steak on Christmas. You eat $40 steaks on random Tuesdays. That's the difference between necessity and privilege. Keep going. Stand in Grandpa Joe's Detroit kitchen on December 24, 1974, and watch him frying bologna. He'd slice thick rounds of bologna, the kind that came in a chub from the butcher, and fry them until the edges curled up and the center puffed like a bowl. He'd fry diced potatoes in the same skillet, letting them soak up the bologna grease. The dinner cost $1 and fed 6 people. The bologna tasted rich and salty, with crispy edges and a juicy center. The potatoes were crispy and savory from the bologna fat. Fried bologna and potatoes disappeared by 1983 when people decided bologna was cheap and low class. Oscar Mayer stopped making thick-sliced bologna, and the tradition died with working-class families who weren't ashamed to fry it. Walk into Grandpa Frank's Pennsylvania kitchen on December 25, 1978, and watch him making fish sticks from scratch. He'd cut frozen fish fillets into strips, dredge them in flour, dip them in beaten egg, coat them in breadcrumbs, and fry them in hot oil until golden. The dinner cost $1.50 and fed 6 people. The fish sticks were crispy outside, flaky inside, tasting like real fish instead of processed sticks from a box. Homemade fish sticks disappeared by 1984 when Gorton's frozen fish sticks became so cheap and convenient that nobody saw the point of making them from scratch. The tradition died when frozen fish sticks became the only version anyone knew, and homemade fish sticks were forgotten entirely. Stand beside Grandma Ruth's Vermont kitchen on December 24, 1975, and watch her making American goulash. She'd brown ground beef with diced onions, drain the grease, then add a can of tomato soup, a can of diced tomatoes, and cooked elbow macaroni. She'd simmer everything together, adding salt, pepper, and paprika. The dinner cost $1.25 and fed 8 people. It tasted tomatoey, beefy, and slightly sweet from the tomato soup. American goulash didn't disappear entirely, but serving it for Christmas dinner did. By 1984, people decided it was too everyday and started calling it slop. The tradition died when working-class families started trying to cook fancy meals on holidays instead of the foods they'd always eaten. Walk into Grandpa Earl's Kentucky kitchen on December 25, 1976, and watch him making smothered pork chops. He'd brown, thick-cut pork chops in a skillet, remove them, then make gravy by frying sliced onions, adding flour and milk. The pork chops went back into the gravy, covered, and simmered until tender. The dinner cost $1.75 and fed 6 people. The pork chops were fall-apart tender, and the gravy was thick, oniony, and rich. Smothered pork chops didn't disappear entirely, but serving them for Christmas dinner did. By 1985, people decided smothered dishes were too Southern and too heavy. The tradition died when lighter, healthier cooking replaced rich gravy-based meals. Stand in Grandpa Bill's Tennessee kitchen on December 24, 1973, and watch him frying ham slices. He'd fry thick slices of country ham until the edges were crispy, remove them, then pour strong black coffee into the hot grease. The coffee and grease combined into red-eye gravy, a thin, dark gravy with a sheen of oil on top. He'd serve the ham and gravy over biscuits. The dinner cost $1.50 and fed 6 people. The ham was intensely salty and fatty, and the red-eye gravy was bitter from the coffee, salty from the ham grease, and slightly sweet. Fried ham with red-eye gravy disappeared by 1984 when country ham stopped being sold in grocery stores, and younger Southerners decided it was too salty and too greasy. 20 dinners down, 30 left. Every single one used the cheapest cuts of meat available. Bologna, country ham, cube steak, ground beef. Your grandfather made them taste like luxury. You pay luxury prices for average food. That's what happens when you forget how to cook. Keep going. Walk into Grandma Betty's Michigan kitchen on December 25, 1978, and watch her making beef stew. She'd cube a cheap cut of beef, brown it, then simmer it with potatoes, carrots, onions, and canned tomatoes for 3 hours. She'd open a can of refrigerated biscuits and drop them on top of the stew, then bake until the biscuits were golden. The dinner cost $2 and fed 8 people. The beef was tender, the vegetables soft, the broth thick, and the biscuits fluffy and buttery. Beef stew with biscuits on top didn't disappear entirely, but serving it for Christmas dinner did. By 1984, people decided stew was too casual for holidays. The tradition died when one-pot meals became unfancy. Stand beside Grandpa Joe's Detroit kitchen on December 24, 1975, and watch him making Salisbury steak with mushroom gravy. He'd shape ground beef mixed with breadcrumbs into oval patties, fry them, then make gravy by frying sliced mushrooms, adding flour and beef broth. The patties simmered in the gravy. The dinner cost $2 and fed 6 people. The Salisbury steaks were savory and tender, and the mushroom gravy was rich and earthy. Salisbury steak with mushroom gravy disappeared by 1984 when people decided making gravy from scratch was too much work and started using canned gravy instead. The tradition died when shortcuts replaced homemade. Walk into Grandpa Frank's Pennsylvania kitchen on December 25, 1976, and watch him frying chicken livers. He'd rinse the livers, pat them dry, dredge them in seasoned flour, and fry them in hot oil until crispy outside but still slightly pink inside. The dinner cost 50 cents and fed 6 people. The chicken livers tasted rich, iron-heavy, and slightly creamy inside. Fried chicken livers disappeared by 1983 when people decided organ meats were disgusting. The tradition died when younger generations refused to eat livers, and they vanished from grocery stores. Grandpa Frank stopped making them in 1980 when his grandchildren gagged at the smell and refused to sit at the table. Stand in Grandma Ruth's Vermont kitchen on December 24, 1974, and watch her making poor man's steak. She'd mix ground beef with breadcrumbs, an egg, an onion soup mix, shape it into a rectangle, then bake it in a loaf pan. After baking, she'd slice it into steaks and serve them with gravy. The dinner cost $1.25 and fed 8 people. The poor man's steak tasted like meatloaf, but denser, with the onion soup mix adding savory flavor. Poor man's steak disappeared by 1985 when people decided calling food poor man's was embarrassing. The tradition died when working-class families started trying to hide their poverty instead of embracing foods that fed them. Walk into Grandpa Bill's Ohio Irish kitchen on December 25, 1977, and watch him making boiled dinner. He'd simmer a corned beef brisket in water for 3 hours, then add quartered cabbage, potatoes, carrots, and onions. Everything cooked together until tender. The dinner cost $2.50 and fed 10 people. The corned beef was salty and tender, the cabbage sweet, the vegetables soft. Boiled dinner didn't disappear entirely, but serving it for Christmas dinner did. By 1984, people decided boiled food was bland and boring. The tradition died when roasting replaced boiling, and simple cooking methods became unsophisticated. 25 dinners gone, halfway there. These used organ meats, ground beef stretched with breadcrumbs, and boiled dinners nobody wanted to admit they ate. Your grandfather fed families on $2. You can't feed yourself on 20. That's what happens when survival skills die. Let's finish this. Stand beside Grandma Betty's Michigan kitchen on December 24th, 1975, and watch her making stuffed bell peppers. She'd cut the tops off bell peppers, remove the seeds, then stuff them with a mixture of browned ground beef, cooked rice, tomato sauce, and diced onion. The peppers went into a baking dish with a little water at the bottom, covered with foil, and baked until tender. The dinner cost $1.50 and fed 6 people. The peppers were soft and sweet, the filling savory and tomatoey. Stuffed bell peppers didn't disappear entirely, but serving them for Christmas dinner did. By 1984, people decided they were too everyday. The tradition died when working-class comfort foods became unfancy. Walk into Grandpa Earl's Kentucky kitchen on December 25th, 1976, and watch him making cube steak with gravy. He'd dredge cube steak in seasoned flour, fry it in a skillet until browned, remove it, then make gravy by whisking flour into the hot oil and adding milk. The steaks simmered in the gravy. The dinner cost $1.75 and fed 6 people. The cube steak was tender from the pounding, and the gravy was thick and peppery. Cube steak with gravy disappeared by 1985 when people decided tenderized meat was cheap. The tradition died when working-class cuts of meat became shameful. Stand in Grandpa Frank's Mississippi kitchen on December 24th, 1973, and watch him frying catfish. He'd dredge catfish fillets in seasoned cornmeal and fry them in hot oil until golden and crispy. He'd make hush puppies by mixing cornmeal, buttermilk, and diced onion, then dropping spoonfuls into the hot oil. The dinner cost $2 and fed 6 people. The catfish was crispy outside, flaky inside, and the hush puppies were crunchy and slightly sweet. Fried catfish and hush puppies didn't disappear entirely, but serving them for Christmas dinner did. By 1984, people decided fried fish was too casual for holidays. The tradition died when working-class Southern foods became regional instead of universal. Walk into Grandma Ruth's Vermont kitchen on December 25th, 1978, and watch her making chicken and dumplings. She'd simmer a whole chicken until it fell apart, remove the bones, then make dumplings by mixing flour, baking powder, milk, and butter into a thick batter. She'd drop spoonfuls of batter into the boiling chicken broth, cover and cook until the dumplings puffed up. The dinner cost $2 and fed 8 people. The chicken was tender, the broth was rich, and the dumplings were fluffy and doughy. Chicken and dumplings didn't disappear entirely, but serving them for Christmas dinner did. By 1984, people decided they were too plain. The tradition died when comfort foods became everyday instead of special. Stand beside Grandpa Bill's Missouri kitchen on December 24th, 1974, and watch him frying pork steak. Pork steak was a cheap cut from the shoulder, sliced thin. He'd dredge it in seasoned flour and fry it in hot oil until crispy and golden. The dinner cost $1.25 and fed 6 people. The pork steak was crispy outside, juicy inside, with a rich pork flavor. Fried pork steak didn't disappear entirely. St. Louis still loves it, but serving it for Christmas dinner did. By 1985, people decided pork steak was too regional and too cheap. The tradition died when working-class cuts of meat became shameful instead of practical. 30 dinners gone, 20 left. Every single one used cheap cuts of meat your grandfather could afford. Cube steak, pork steak, catfish, chicken parts. He made them taste special on Christmas. You pay $50 for fancy cuts any Tuesday. That's the difference between necessity and privilege. Let's finish. Walk into Grandma Betty's Michigan kitchen on December 25th, 1975, and watch her making pot roast. She'd brown a cheap chuck roast in a Dutch oven, remove it, then add sliced onions, carrots, potatoes, and celery. The roast went back in. She'd add beef broth, cover it tightly, and simmer on the stovetop for 3 hours until the meat fell apart. The vegetables cooked in the beef drippings and became soft and flavorful. She'd make gravy from the cooking liquid by whisking in a little flour. The dinner cost $3 and fed 8 people. The pot roast was tender enough to cut with a fork, rich and beefy. The vegetables were soft and savory, soaking up all the meat juices. The gravy was thick, dark, and intensely flavored. Pot roast didn't disappear entirely, but serving it for Christmas dinner did. By 1984, people decided pot roast was too every day and started serving prime rib or standing rib roast instead, cuts that cost 5 times as much. The tradition died when working-class families started trying to compete with wealthier neighbors, abandoning the foods that had fed them for generations. Grandma Betty stopped making pot roast for Christmas in 1982 when her daughter said it wasn't fancy enough and insisted on buying an expensive ham instead. Stand beside Grandpa Joe's Detroit kitchen on December 24, 1976, and watch him making neck bones and rice. He'd buy pork neck bones from the butcher for 50 cents a pound, the bones nobody else wanted. He'd simmer them in water with onions, garlic, and bay leaves for 4 hours until the meat fell off the bones. He'd serve the neck bones and broth over white rice, with hot sauce on the side. The dinner cost $1 and fed 6 people. The neck bones were fatty and rich, with little bits of tender meat clinging to the bones. You ate them with your hands, sucking the meat and marrow off the bones. The broth was deeply flavorful, soaking into the rice and making it savory and satisfying. Neck bones and rice disappeared by 1983 when butchers stopped selling neck bones, and people decided eating off bones with your hands was uncivilized. The tradition died when working-class black Southern families moved to cities and younger generations refused to eat foods their grandparents ate during hard times. Grandpa Joe stopped making neck bones in 1980 when he couldn't find them at the grocery store anymore. They'd been relegated to pet food. The knowledge of how to make something delicious from the cheapest, most unwanted cut of meat was lost, and an entire tradition of survival cooking disappeared. Walk into Grandpa Frank's Pennsylvania kitchen on December 25, 1977, and watch him making smoked sausage with potatoes and onions. He'd slice a ring of smoked kielbasa into thick coins, fry them in a cast-iron skillet until browned, then add sliced potatoes and sliced onions to the same skillet. Everything fried together in the sausage grease, cooking until the potatoes were crispy and the onions were caramelized. The dinner cost $1.75 and fed 6 people. The sausage was smoky and fatty, the potatoes were crispy outside and fluffy inside, and the onions were sweet and caramelized. Everything tasted like the sausage because it was all cooked in the same grease. Smoked sausage with potatoes and onions didn't disappear entirely, but serving it for Christmas dinner did. By 1984, people decided one-skillet meals were too simple and too casual for holidays. The tradition died when working-class families started trying to make impressive meals with multiple courses instead of simple, satisfying dinners cooked in one pan. Grandpa Frank stopped making it for Christmas in 1982 when his family said they wanted something special, even though this meal had been special to him for 30 years. Stand in Grandpa Earl's rural Kentucky kitchen on December 24, 1973, and watch him frying venison steaks. He'd hunted a deer in November, butchered it himself, and kept the meat in the freezer. On Christmas Eve, he'd slice venison steaks from the hindquarter, pound them thin with a meat mallet to tenderize them, dredge them in seasoned flour, and fry them in hot oil until crispy and golden. The venison had to be cooked quickly. Overcooked venison turned tough and gamey. The dinner cost nothing because he'd hunted the deer himself, and it fed 8 people. The venison tasted lean and slightly gamey, with a wild flavor that was richer than beef. The flour coating made it crispy, and helped mask some of the gaminess. He'd serve it with milk gravy to make it more palatable for kids who didn't like wild meat. Fried venison steaks disappeared as a Christmas dinner by 1985, when fewer working-class families hunted for food and started buying their meat from grocery stores instead. The tradition died when hunting went from necessity to hobby, and wild game became something only rednecks ate. Grandpa Earl stopped serving venison at Christmas in 1981 when his grandchildren said it tasted weird, and refused to eat it even though he'd been feeding his family with hunted meat for 40 years. Walk into Grandma Betty's Michigan kitchen on December 25, 1978, and watch her making breaded veal cutlets. She'd pound veal cutlets paper-thin with a meat mallet, dredge them in flour, dip them in beaten egg, coat them in breadcrumbs mixed with grated Parmesan, and fry them in hot oil until golden. The cutlets were so thin they cooked in less than 2 minutes per side. The dinner cost $3 and fed 6 people. Veal was expensive, but she bought it on sale before Christmas. The veal was tender and delicate with a mild flavor. The breading was crispy and cheesy, adding crunch and flavor to the delicate meat. Breaded veal cutlets didn't disappear entirely, but serving them for Christmas dinner did. By 1985, veal became prohibitively expensive, and animal rights activists made people feel guilty about eating baby cows. The tradition died when veal went from affordable special occasion meat to luxury item, and working-class families couldn't afford it anymore. Grandma Betty stopped making veal cutlets in 1983 when the price tripled, and she switched to chicken cutlets instead, which tasted similar but lacked the tenderness of veal. 35 dinners erased, 15 left. These used neck bones, venison, veal cutlets, smoked sausage, whatever your grandfather could hunt, butcher, or buy on sale. He made it taste like a feast. You pay $60 for mediocre restaurant food. That's the difference. Here are the last 15. Stand beside Grandpa Bill's Ohio rural kitchen on December 24, 1974, and watch him frying rabbit. He'd hunted or trapped rabbits in the fall, cleaned and butchered them, and kept the meat frozen. On Christmas Eve, he'd cut the rabbit into pieces like chicken, soak them in buttermilk overnight to remove the gamey taste, dredge them in seasoned flour, and fry them in hot lard until golden and crispy. The dinner cost nothing because he'd hunted the rabbits himself, and 1 rabbit fed 4 people. The rabbit tasted like dark meat chicken, but leaner and slightly gamey, with a texture that was tender when cooked properly. The flour coating made it crispy and helped mask the wild flavor. Fried rabbit disappeared as a Christmas dinner by 1983, when hunting rabbits for food became uncommon and people started thinking of rabbits as pets instead of dinner. The tradition died when working-class families stopped hunting for survival and started buying their meat from grocery stores. Grandpa Bill stopped serving rabbit at Christmas in 1980 when his grandchildren cried because they thought he'd cooked the Easter bunny, even though he'd been eating wild rabbit his entire life, and it had nothing to do with pet rabbits. Walk into Grandpa Frank's Kentucky kitchen on December 25, 1975, and watch him making beans and cornbread for Christmas dinner. He'd simmer a pot of pinto beans with a ham hock for 4 hours until the beans were tender and the ham hock had flavored the broth. Meanwhile, he'd make cornbread from scratch, cornmeal, buttermilk, an egg, and a little bacon grease, and bake it in a cast-iron skillet until golden. The dinner cost 75 cents and fed 8 people. The beans were creamy and smoky from the ham hock, the broth was rich and savory, and the cornbread was crispy on the bottom, fluffy inside, with a slightly sweet corn flavor. You'd crumble the cornbread into a bowl, ladle beans and broth over it, and eat it like soup. Beans and cornbread disappeared as a Christmas dinner by 1984, when people decided it was too poor and too plain for a holiday meal. The tradition died when working-class families started trying to serve fancy dinners on Christmas and abandoned the foods that had sustained them through poverty. Grandpa Frank stopped serving beans and cornbread for Christmas in 1981 when his family said they were embarrassed to tell people they ate beans for Christmas dinner. Stand in Grandma Ruth's Vermont kitchen on December 24th, 1976, and watch her making fried pork chops with apples. She'd dredge thin-cut pork chops in seasoned flour and fry them in hot lard until golden and crispy. After removing the chops, she'd fry thick slices of apple in the same skillet, letting them caramelize in the pork grease and brown sugar. The apples cooked until soft and sweet, with caramelized edges. The dinner cost $1.50 and fed 6 people. The pork chops were crispy outside and juicy inside, and the fried apples were sweet, tangy, and smoky from the pork grease. The combination of savory pork and sweet apples was perfect. The apples cut through the richness of the fried meat. Fried pork chops with apples didn't disappear entirely, but serving them for Christmas dinner did. By 1985, people decided fried foods were too casual and too greasy for holidays. The tradition died when baked pork chops replaced fried, and the art of frying apples in pork grease was forgotten. Grandma Ruth stopped making it for Christmas in 1982 when her family said they wanted something lighter, even though this meal had been a family tradition for 3 generations. Walk into Grandpa Earl's Kentucky kitchen on December 25th, 1977, and watch him making steak and gravy. He'd buy the cheapest cut of steak available, usually round steak, pound it thin with a meat mallet to tenderize it, dredge it in flour, and fry it in a skillet until browned. He'd remove the steaks, make gravy by whisking flour into the hot grease and adding beef broth, then simmer the steaks in the gravy until tender. He'd serve the steak and gravy over mashed potatoes. The dinner cost $2.50 and fed 6 people. The steak was tender from the pounding and simmering, and the gravy was rich, thick, and beefy. The mashed potatoes soaked up the gravy and made the meal filling and satisfying. Steak and gravy over mashed potatoes didn't disappear entirely, but serving it for Christmas dinner did. By 1985, people decided real steak shouldn't need gravy and started grilling expensive cuts instead. The tradition died when working-class families started trying to serve fancy steaks on Christmas, ribeyes and New York strips they couldn't afford, and abandoned the cheaper cuts that had fed them for decades. Grandpa Earl stopped making it in 1983 when his family said round steak was too tough, even though he'd been tenderizing and cooking it perfectly for 30 years. Stand beside Grandpa Bill's Tennessee Mountain Kitchen on December 24th, 1973, and watch him frying trout. He'd caught the trout himself from a local stream in the fall, cleaned and gutted them, and kept them frozen. On Christmas Eve, he'd dredge the whole trout in cornmeal mixed with salt and pepper, then fry them in hot oil until the skin was crispy and golden. The trout were small, 6 to 8 inches long, so each person got 2 or 3 whole fish. The dinner cost nothing because he'd caught the fish himself, and it fed 6 people. The trout were crispy outside, flaky and delicate inside, with a mild sweet flavor. You ate them with your hands, pulling the meat off the bones and discarding the head and skeleton. Fried trout disappeared as a Christmas dinner by 1984 when fewer working-class families fished for food and started buying their fish from grocery stores instead. The tradition died when fishing went from necessity to hobby, and wild-caught fish became something only country people ate. Grandpa Bill stopped serving trout at Christmas in 1981 when his grandchildren said eating whole fish with heads still on was gross, even though he'd been catching and frying trout his entire life, and it was the freshest, best-tasting fish you could get. 40 dinners gone, 10 left. These used wild game your grandfather hunted, trapped, and fished: rabbit, venison, trout. He provided for his family without spending a dime. You pay $30 for farm-raised fish at Whole Foods. That's what happens when survival skills die. Here are the last 10. Walk into Grandpa Joe's Detroit kitchen on December 25, 1978, and watch him frying chicken gizzards. Gizzards were part of the giblet bag that came inside whole chickens, and most people threw them away. He'd save them in the freezer until he had enough for a meal. On Christmas, he'd rinse the gizzards, cut them in half to check for grit, soak them in buttermilk, dredge them in seasoned flour, and fry them in hot oil until crispy and golden. The dinner cost almost nothing because gizzards were free with chicken purchases, and it fed 4 people. Gizzards tasted like dark meat chicken, but chewier, with a texture that was firm and slightly rubbery. The flour coating made them crispy and added flavor. You had to chew them well. They weren't tender like regular chicken. Fried chicken gizzards disappeared by 1983 when people decided organ meats were disgusting and started throwing away giblet bags without opening them. The tradition died when younger generations refused to eat anything that wasn't boneless, skinless chicken breast. Stand beside Grandpa Frank's rural Kentucky kitchen on December 24, 1974, and watch him frying squirrel. He'd hunted squirrels in the fall. They were plentiful in the woods behind his house, cleaned and butchered them and kept the meat frozen. On Christmas Eve, he'd cut the squirrels into pieces, soak them in salted water overnight to remove the gamey taste, dredge them in seasoned flour, and fry them in hot lard until crispy. The dinner cost nothing because he'd hunted the squirrels himself, and 3 squirrels fed 6 people. Squirrel tasted like dark meat chicken, but leaner and gamier, with a texture that was tender when cooked slowly. The legs and back were the best parts. The front legs were too small to bother with. Fried squirrel disappeared as a Christmas dinner by 1983, when hunting squirrels for food became uncommon, and people started thinking of squirrels as pests or cute backyard animals instead of dinner. The tradition died when working-class rural families stopped hunting for survival, and younger generations refused to eat wild game. Grandpa Frank stopped serving squirrel at Christmas in 1981 when his grandchildren said it was gross, and asked if he'd killed Chip and Dale, even though squirrel had been a staple protein for his family during the Depression, and feeding his family with hunted meat was something he was proud of. Walk into Grandpa Bill's Tennessee kitchen on December 25, 1975, and watch him making salt pork with greens. He'd slice salt pork into thick pieces and fry them in a cast-iron skillet until crispy like bacon. He'd remove the pork, then add fresh collard greens, or turnip greens, to the hot grease, along with a little water, and simmer them for an hour until tender. The greens cooked in the pork grease and became rich and savory. The dinner cost 50 cents and fed 6 people. The salt pork was intensely salty and fatty, melting in your mouth like bacon. The greens were tender, smoky, and rich from the pork grease. You'd serve it with cornbread to soak up the pot liquor, the flavorful liquid left in the bottom of the pot. Salt pork with greens disappeared by 1984 when grocery stores stopped selling salt pork, and people decided it was too salty and too greasy. The tradition died when Southern foodways became regional instead of universal, and younger generations stopped eating greens cooked in pork grease. Grandpa Bill stopped making it for Christmas in 1982 when his doctor told him to stop eating so much salt, even though he'd eaten salt pork his entire life and lived to be 87 years old. Stand in Grandpa Joe's Michigan Lake Cottage kitchen on December 24, 1976, and watch him frying perch. He'd ice-fished for perch in December, caught a bucketful, filleted them immediately, and kept them frozen until Christmas. On Christmas Eve, he'd dredge the perch fillets in seasoned flour and fry them in hot oil until golden and crispy. Perch were small. Each fillet was only a few inches long, so each person got 5 or 6 fillets. The dinner cost nothing because he'd caught the fish himself. and it fed 6 people. Perch were sweet and delicate, with a mild flavor and flaky texture. The flour coating made them crispy and helped them hold together during frying. Fried perch didn't disappear entirely. Michigan still loves perch, but serving it for Christmas dinner did. By 1984, fewer working-class families ice-fished for food, and perch became something you ordered at fish fries, not something you caught and fried at home. The tradition died when fishing went from necessity to hobby, and wild-caught fish became too much work when you could buy frozen fish sticks instead. Grandpa Joe stopped serving perch at Christmas in 1983 when his family said they'd rather have store-bought shrimp, even though fresh-caught perch was infinitely better. Walk into Grandpa Frank's Pennsylvania kitchen on December 25, 1977, and watch him frying beef liver with onions for Christmas dinner. He'd slice beef liver thin, soak it in milk for an hour to remove the bitter taste, dredge it in seasoned flour, and fry it quickly in hot bacon grease. No more than 2 minutes per side, or it would turn grainy. He'd fry sliced onions in the same skillet until caramelized and pile them on top of the liver. The dinner cost $1 and fed 6 people because liver was one of the cheapest cuts you could buy. The liver tasted rich and iron-heavy, with a texture that was soft and tender when cooked correctly. The onions were sweet and caramelized, cutting through the liver's intensity, and he believed wasting any part of the animal was sinful. 45 dinners erased. 5 left. These used organ meats, wild game, salt pork, things your grandfather hunted, trapped, and bought because they cost almost nothing. He fed families on food you throw away. That's the difference between survival and waste. Here are the last 5. Stand beside Grandpa Earl's Kentucky kitchen on December 24, 1973, and watch him making oxtail stew. Oxtails were the tails of cattle, cut into segments with meat clinging to the bone. They were cheap because nobody wanted them. He'd brown the oxtails in a Dutch oven, then add onions, carrots, potatoes, tomatoes, and beef broth. The stew simmered on the stovetop for 4 hours until the meat fell off the bones and the broth turned rich and gelatinous from the collagen. The dinner cost $1.50 and fed 8 people. Oxtails tasted rich, beefy, and gelatinous, with the meat tender and falling off the bone. The broth was thick and flavorful, almost like gravy. You ate oxtails with your hands, sucking the meat and marrow off the bones. Oxtail stew disappeared by 1985 when oxtails became expensive. They went from 50 cents a pound to $8 a pound when chefs discovered them and put them on fancy restaurant menus. The tradition died when the cheapest cuts of meat became luxury items, and working-class families who'd been eating oxtails for generations couldn't afford them anymore. Grandpa Earl stopped making oxtail stew for Christmas in 1984 when the price tripled, and he switched to chuck roast instead, which was cheaper but nowhere near as flavorful or tender. Walk into Grandpa Bill's North Carolina kitchen on December 25, 1978, and watch him frying pig's feet. He'd buy pickled pig's feet in jars from the grocery store for 75 cents, drain them, coat them in seasoned flour, and fry them in hot oil until the skin was crispy and golden. Pig's feet were mostly skin, fat, and bone, with very little meat, but the skin turned into crispy, gelatinous bites when fried properly. The dinner cost $1 and fed 4 people. Pig's feet tasted rich, fatty, and gelatinous, with a texture that was chewy and slightly crunchy from the fried skin. You ate them with your hands, gnawing the meat and fat off the bones. They were an acquired taste. You either loved them or hated them. Fried pig's feet disappeared by 1983 when grocery stores stopped selling pickled pig's feet in jars, and people decided eating feet was disgusting. The tradition died when younger generations refused to eat anything that still looked like the animal it came from. Grandpa Bill stopped making pig's feet for Christmas in 1980 when his grandchildren said they looked gross and asked why he was eating dog food, even though pig's feet had been a delicacy for him his entire life and the only meat his family could afford during the Depression. Walk into Grandpa Frank's Pennsylvania kitchen on December 24th, 1974, and watch him cooking beef tongue. He'd buy a beef tongue from the butcher for $1. Nobody else wanted it. He'd simmer it in water with onions and bay leaves for 3 hours until tender. After cooling slightly, he'd peel off the thick outer skin, slice the tongue thin, and fry the slices in butter. He'd make gravy from the cooking liquid by whisking in flour and butter. Dinner cost $1 and fed 8 people. Beef tongue tasted rich and beefy, with a texture that was tender and slightly grainy, similar to pot roast, but more flavorful. The gravy was thick and savory. Most people couldn't tell it was tongue if you didn't tell them. It just tasted like really good beef. Beef tongue disappeared by 1983 when butchers stopped selling it and people decided eating tongue was disgusting. The tradition died when younger generations refused to eat organ meats or anything that reminded them the meat came from an animal. Grandpa Frank stopped making tongue for Christmas in 1980 when his grandchildren found out what it was and refused to eat another bite, even though they'd been happily eating it for years without knowing, and had always said it was delicious. Walk into Grandpa Joe's Detroit Chinatown neighborhood kitchen on December 25th, 1976, and watch him frying chicken feet. Chicken feet were sold at the Chinese market for almost nothing, 10 cents a pound. He'd clean the feet, remove the outer skin by blanching them in boiling water, clip off the nails, then marinate them in soy sauce, ginger, and garlic. He'd fry them in hot oil until crispy, then braise them in the marinade until tender. The dinner cost 25 cents and fed 4 people. Chicken feet were mostly skin, tendons, and bone, with almost no meat. They tasted like concentrated chicken flavor with a gelatinous texture from the collagen. You ate them with your hands, sucking the skin and cartilage off the bones. Fried chicken feet disappeared from American tables by 1983 when Chinese markets stopped catering to non-Asian customers and people decided eating feet was weird. The tradition died when younger generations refused to eat anything that still looked like a body part. Grandpa Joe stopped making chicken feet for Christmas in 1980 when his grandchildren said they looked creepy and refused to try them, even though chicken feet had been a prized delicacy in his Chinese neighborhood, and cooking them for Christmas was his way of honoring his heritage while celebrating an American holiday. Stand beside Grandpa Bill's Tennessee kitchen on December 24th, 1975, and watch him frying hog jowl. Hog jowl was the cheek meat of a pig, cured like bacon and sold in thick slabs for 50 cents a pound. On Christmas Eve, he'd slice the hog jowl thick and fry it in a cast-iron skillet until the fat rendered and the meat turned crispy like bacon. The jowl was fattier than bacon, with layers of meat and fat marbled together. He'd serve it with black-eyed peas and cornbread, a Southern tradition for good luck on New Year's, but his family ate it on Christmas too, because it was cheap and delicious. The dinner cost 75 cents and fed 6 people. Hog jowl tasted like bacon, but richer and fattier, with the meat tender and the fat crispy. It was intensely flavorful and salty, melting in your mouth. Fried hog jowl disappeared by 1984 when grocery stores stopped selling it, and people decided eating jowl was too country. The tradition died when younger Southern families stopped eating traditional foods and started trying to cook like white-collar suburbanites. Grandpa Bill stopped making hog jowl for Christmas in 1982 when his family said it was too fatty and embarrassing, even though hog jowl had fed his family through poverty, and he believed it was the most flavorful part of the pig. Your blue-collar grandfather worked 50-hour weeks in factories, mills, and mines. He came home exhausted and still made dinner for his family. He stretched ground beef with breadcrumbs, made gravy from pan drippings, fried everything in lard because butter was too expensive. He hunted because buying meat at the store cost money he didn't have. He ate organ meats because throwing away any part of the animal was wasteful and sinful. His Christmas dinner might have been fried bologna and potatoes, but it was made with love and served with pride. Then everything changed. Working-class foods became trashy, organ meats became disgusting, wild game became redneck food, fried foods became unhealthy, and everyone started pretending they'd always eaten prime rib and glazed ham on Christmas, even though most families couldn't afford it. The truth is, your grandfather's Christmas dinner fed his family. Your $60 restaurant meal feeds your ego. Call your grandfather if he's still alive. Ask him what he ate for Christmas when he was young. Write it down. Make it once. Don't let the memory of working-class survival cooking die completely. Because once his generation is gone, these meals are gone forever. And all you'll have left is a DoorDash app and shame about where you came from. Your grandfather's cast-iron skillet is gone. His fried pork chops are forgotten. You can remember. You can learn. You can make one, just one, of these 50 dinners next Christmas. Head high. Or you can order takeout and pretend you never knew any better.